I never thought I'd find myself in this position. I'm Mark, just an average guy with a stable job as a graphic designer, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my wife, Lisa. We had what I thought was a perfect life: two kids, a modest house filled with laughter, and dreams of growing old together. Lisa was the love of my life, the one who made my heart race and my soul complete. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Lisa and I had been married for nearly a decade. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. Her laughter was infectious and her kindness knew no bounds. I remember the way she used to look at me, a gaze filled with love and admiration. But as the years went by, things started to shift. The late nights at work, the sudden need for me time, and the subtle changes in her behavior, it all began to gnaw at me. It was during one particularly uneventful evening that I first noticed something was off. Lisa had come home late, her cheeks flushed, and her hair slightly disheveled. She brushed off my questions about where she had been with a vague excuse about a work project. I wanted to believe her, I truly did. But deep down, a seed of doubt began to take root. Then came the whispers. It started with the occasional mention of a new colleague at her office, a guy named Alex. He was an investigative journalist, known for his sharp wit and charisma. Lisa spoke of him with a spark in her eye that I hadn't seen in years. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. After all, what could a journalist possibly want with my wife? But as the days turned into weeks, the signs became harder to ignore. The late-night phone calls, the secretive texts, and the way she would smile at her phone. I was a fool to think it was just work-related. The gut feeling that something was wrong turned into annoying certainty. I knew I had to confront her, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if I lost her for good? One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I followed her after she claimed she was going out for groceries. My heart pounded in my chest as I trailed her car to a small cafe on the outskirts of town. I parked a few spaces away, my palms sweaty against the steering wheel. I watched as she entered the cafe, and my heart sank as I spotted Alex sitting at a corner table. The sight of them together sent a wave of nausea through me. They were laughing, leaning into each other, their chemistry undeniable. I watched, frozen, as they shared a moment that should have been ours. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I remained rooted to my seat, paralyzed by the truth unfolding before my eyes. I returned home that evening, my mind racing. The image of Lisa and Alex together replayed in my head like a broken record. I felt betrayed, angry, and lost. How could she do this to us? To our family? The love I once felt for her morphed into something dark and twisted. It was clear that I had to gather evidence before confronting her. I needed to know the full extent of their relationship, not just for my sake, but for the sake of our children. As I laid in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew I had two choices: confront her and risk everything, or take a different path. A path that would allow me to regain control over my shattered life. Revenge. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the only option that could bring me the closure I desperately craved. I could ruin him, the man who had invaded my life and tainted my marriage. I could ensure that his name, his precious reputation, would be buried under the weight of his own scandal. But how? The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I oscillated between heartbreak and a simmering anger that felt like a fire raging within me. Each moment I spent with Lisa felt like a performance, a charade I was forced to maintain while I plotted my revenge. I watched her closely, taking mental notes of her movements and interactions with Alex. It was a twisted game of chess, and I was determined to be the one who emerged victorious. In the weeks that followed, I began to gather information about Alex. I knew that as an investigative journalist, he thrived on uncovering the dirt on others, but little did he know that his own skeletons were about to be exposed. I started by doing some research online, digging into his past stories and articles. I discovered that he had a reputation for being ruthless in his pursuit of a good story, often crossing ethical lines to get what he wanted. This gave me a sense of satisfaction. If he was willing to ruin others, then why shouldn't I do the same to him? I began to frequent the cafe where I had seen Lisa and Alex together, pretending to work on my laptop while I watched them interact. It was a strange mix of pain and pleasure. I would see them laughing, sharing stories, and occasionally exchanging lingering touches that made my blood boil. I felt like a ghost haunting the place, invisible yet deeply affected by every moment they shared. During this time, I learned more about Alex's life. His social media accounts were surprisingly revealing, showcasing a life filled with parties, friends, and a surprising number of women. One evening, as I sat in the cafe, I overheard a conversation between two patrons discussing Alex's latest article. They mentioned how he had been involved in a scandal a few years back, where he had been accused of fabricating sources for a story. The scandal had been buried, but the whispers remained. This was my opening. I decided to dig deeper, to uncover the truth behind that scandal and any other dirt I could find. The next step was to gather evidence. I started following Alex, tracking his movements and interactions. I knew I had to be careful. He was a seasoned journalist and I didn't want to raise any suspicion. I learned his routine, where he went after work, who he spent time with, and the places he frequented. I found out that he often visited a bar that was known for its loose atmosphere, a place where secrets were traded like currency. It was the perfect place to gather information. One evening, I donned a disguise, a simple hat and sunglasses, and made my way to the bar. The dim lighting and raucous laughter felt like a world away from my life as a devoted husband. I ordered a drink and took a seat. At the bar, scanning the crowd for Alex. It didn't take long before I spotted him, chatting animatedly with a group of friends. I listened intently, eavesdropping on conversations, hopping to catch a slip of the tongue or a hint of a secret. As the night wore on, I struck up conversations with a few regulars, subtly steering the topics toward Alex. It was then that I learned more about his reputation, how he had a penchant for pursuing relationships with the sources he wrote about, often blurring the lines between professional and personal. I could sense the disdain in their voices as they recounted stories of his exploits. It was the kind of information that could ruin a man, especially one who relied on credibility to fuel his career. Armed with this knowledge, I began to formulate my plan. I would expose Alex for the fraud he was, a man who took advantage of others for his gain. I envisioned a series of articles that would unravel his career, revealing the truth behind his charming facade. But I knew I needed more than just hearsay. I needed concrete evidence to back up my claims. I decided to reach out to some of the women Alex had allegedly pursued during his career. I crafted an anonymous email, posing as someone who had been wronged by him, sharing my concerns about his unethical behavior. I knew that if I could find just one woman willing to speak out against him, it could be the catalyst for the downfall I envisioned. It was a risky move, but I was fueled by a sense of purpose. The more I uncovered about Alex, the more I felt like I was reclaiming my life. I couldn't let Lisa's betrayal define me. Instead, I would use it to rewrite the narrative. I would not only avenge myself, but also show Lisa the consequences of her actions. As I sat in front of my computer preparing to send the email, I paused for a moment. A part of me questioned whether I was crossing a line. Was I becoming the monster I sought to destroy? But the pain of betrayal was too fresh, and the thought of Alex laughing with my wife pushed me forward. I pressed send, and in that moment I felt a rush of adrenaline. I was on the path to revenge, and there was no turning back. The email I sent was just the beginning. I watched and waited, my heart racing as I anticipated a response. Days turned into a week, and still I heard nothing. I was consumed by a mix of anxiety and determination. Had I made a mistake? Was my plan doomed to fail? But then, just as I began to doubt my course of action, I received a reply. The woman's name was Sarah. She had once been a source for Alex, and her email was filled with anger and hurt. She recounted how Alex had manipulated her trust, pursuing her not just for her story, but for a personal relationship that had left her feeling used and discarded. Her words were like fuel to the fire of revenge burning inside me. I had found my first ally. We exchanged several emails, and I learned that Sarah was not the only one who had fallen victim to Alex's charm. She connected me with two other women, each with their own stories of betrayal and manipulation at the hands of the so-called journalist. I could hardly contain my excitement. This was the ammunition I needed. Together, we could expose him and bring his career crashing down. As I continued to communicate with Sarah and the others, I found myself becoming more deeply involved in their lives. They shared their experiences with me, revealing not just the professional misconduct of Alex, but also the emotional turmoil they had faced. I felt a strange sense of camaraderie with them, a bond forged through shared pain and betrayal. It was a reminder that I was not alone in this fight. But as I gathered more information, I began to feel the weight of my actions. Was I truly justified in destroying Alex's career? He had wronged me, yes, but was I becoming the very thing I despised? I wrestled with these thoughts late at night, often tossing and turning in bed beside Lisa. She remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of our seemingly normal life. I decided that I needed to confront her, to gauge her feelings about Alex and their relationship. I devised a plan to bring up the subject casually, to see if she would confess without any prompting. One evening, over dinner, I mentioned that I had heard about a journalist who had been accused of unethical behavior. Lisa's reaction was immediate. She seemed to stiffen, her fork pausing midair. "Oh, what did he do?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. I played it cool, recounting the rumors I had heard about Alex without nomming him. Just some stories about how he gets too close to his sources, crossing the line between professionalism and personal relationships, I said, watching her closely. She shrugged it off, a nervous smile creeping onto her face. "That doesn't sound like a big deal. Journalists are just passionate about their work." Her defense of him stung. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I held it in check. I needed to remain calm to keep the upper hand. "Sure, but there's a difference between passion and manipulation, don't you think?" Lisa's eyes darted away from mine, and I could see the guilt flickering in her gaze. It was a tiny crack in her facade, a glimpse into the truth I already knew. I felt a rush of satisfaction, knowing that my suspicions were valid, but I also felt a pang of sadness. The woman I loved was slipping away from me, entangled in a web of deceit. After our dinner conversation, I refocused my efforts on gathering evidence against Alex. I began to compile everything I had learned from Sarah and the other women. I organized their stories, looking for patterns and inconsistencies that could be used to paint a clearer picture of his character. I knew that if I could present a compelling case, it would be easier to rally public opinion against him. Meanwhile, I continued to follow Alex, documenting his movements and interactions. I captured photos of him with various women at the bar, and I even managed to record a few conversations that hinted at his manipulative nature. The more I collected, the more emboldened I felt. I was building a case, and soon I would unleash it to the world. But as I delved deeper into my plan, I started to notice changes in Lisa. She seemed more distant, preoccupied with her phone, and I could sense a growing tension between us. It was as if she could feel the shift in my demeanor, the undercurrent of betrayal that now colored our interactions. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I held back. I needed to keep my focus on Alex. One night, as I was sifting through my notes and photographs, I received a message from Sarah. She had found an article that Alex had written about one of the women he had pursued. It was glowing, filled with praise for her work, but it was clear that their relationship had been far more personal than professional. This was the smoking gun I had been searching for. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I began drafting an outline for the exposé I would publish. I would weave together the stories of Sarah and the other women, interspersed with the evidence I had gathered. It would be a devastating blow to Alex's reputation, and I savored the thought of it. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if I was wrong? What if this destruction came back to haunt me? I was treading a dangerous line, and I knew there would be no turning back once I crossed it. The weight of my decision hung heavily over me, but in that moment I pushed it aside. I was a man scorned and I would not let my wife's betrayal go unpunished. I was ready to set my plan into motion. The day I decided to put my plan into action felt like a turning point in my life. I had spent weeks gathering information, connecting with Sarah and the other women, and now it was time to unleash the storm. I felt a mix of exhilaration and trepidation as I prepared to write the exposé. This would not just be about revenge. It would be a cathartic release, a way to reclaim my own narrative after being blindsided by betrayal. I spent the entire weekend writing, pouring my heart into the article. I meticulously crafted the introduction, setting the stage for the shocking revelations to come. I wanted it to be powerful and impactful, a piece that would leave no doubt about Alex's character. I wove in the stories of the women, their pain, their struggles, and their encounters with him. I made sure to include the evidence I had collected, photos, snippets of conversations, and accounts of his unethical behavior. It was a tapestry of deceit, and I was the one pulling the strings. As I typed late into the night, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my moment to take control, to turn the tables on the man who had invaded my life. But beneath that exhilaration lay a creeping sense of doubt. Was I really doing the right thing? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my actions could have serious consequences, not just for Alex, but for me as well. However, the thought of Lisa and her betrayal pushed me forward. I reminded myself that I was not just fighting for my dignity, but for the dignity of the women Alex had hurt. I needed to see this through. Once I had finished drafting the article, I decided to enlist Sarah's help. She had been instrumental in gathering information, and I knew that her voice would add credibility to my piece. I sent her a draft, asking for her feedback and any additional details she could provide. I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page, united in our fight against Alex. The response came quickly. Sarah was enthusiastic about the article, praising my writing and offering to share her story in a more personal way. She was ready to go public, to stand alongside the other women who had suffered at the hands of Alex. Her courage inspired me, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. As we prepared to launch our exposé, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. I knew that once I hit publish, there would be no turning back. The thought of Lisa discovering my plan terrified me. What if she sided with Alex? What if this destroyed our family? But I convinced myself that I had to follow through. This was about justice, not just revenge. On the chosen day, I woke up early, my heart racing with anticipation. I double-checked everything, ensuring that the article was polished and ready. I felt a mix of excitement and fear as I prepared to share it with the world. I posted it on a blog I had set up, a platform dedicated to exposing unethical behavior in journalism. I hit publish, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring at the screen. The notifications began to roll in almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers started sharing the article. The comments section exploded with reactions, some supportive, others skeptical. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I realized that my words were reaching people, that they were resonating with those who had experienced similar betrayals. But then, just as quickly, the tide began to turn. I received a message from Lisa asking if we could talk. My heart dropped. She had seen the article, and I knew this was it, the moment of reckoning. I felt a mix of dread and anticipation as I prepared to face her. We met at the cafe where I had first witnessed her betrayal. The irony was not lost on me. As we sat across from each other, I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Mark, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "It's the truth, Lisa, the truth about Alex, about everything." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious. You're ruining his life. What about our life?" I felt a wave of anger rise within me. "What about our life? You were the one who chose to betray me. You were the one who brought him into our lives." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the laughter they had shared, the way she had turned her back on our marriage. I had to do this, Lisa. I had to take a stand for myself and for the women he hurt. She looked away, her expression shifting from anger to sadness. "You're hurting me, Mark. You're hurting our family." I could feel the weight of her words. I had wanted to hurt Alex, but now I was realizing that my actions were also hurting the person I once loved. I didn't want it to come to this, I said, my voice softening, but I can't just sit back and let him get away with it. Lisa's silence hung heavy between us. I could see the internal conflict playing out in her mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What if you're wrong? What if this destroys us? I felt a pang of doubt. Was I truly willing to sacrifice everything for revenge? But then I remembered the pain of betrayal, the years of love that had been shattered. I had to see this through, not just for myself, but for all the women who had suffered. As we sat there, the reality of my actions began to sink in. I was standing at a crossroads, and the choices I made now would determine the course of my life. I had unleashed a storm, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared for the aftermath. The days that followed the publication of my exposé felt surreal. The article had gone viral, causing a ripple effect that I hadn't fully anticipated. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly Alex was thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Reports of his alleged misconduct flooded social media, and with each new post, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and dread. In the immediate aftermath, Alex's response was defensive. He issued a statement denying the allegations, calling the claims baseless and malicious. It was the classic playbook of a man caught off guard, and I could see the desperation in his words. But I knew that the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I reveled in the thought of his career crumbling. However, the victory felt hollow. I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, but instead I was consumed by a gnawing anxiety. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the media frenzy continued, I found myself in a constant state of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that my actions would come back to haunt me. Lisa and I had barely spoken since our confrontation at the cafe. The tension between us was palpable, like a thick fog that refused to lift. She was struggling to process the fallout from my actions, and I could see the strain it was putting on our marriage. I wanted to reach out to bridge the gap that had formed between us, but I was paralyzed by the fear of her reaction. One evening, after another long day of watching the news cycle unfold, I returned home to find Lisa sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. I could tell she had been crying, and my heart sank. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but strained. I nodded, my throat dry as I took a seat across from her. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us. "I'm sorry for how everything has turned out," I began, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Mark, this isn't just about Alex anymore, it's about us. You've turned our lives upside down, and I don't know if I can forgive you for this." Her words cut deep. I had envisioned this moment as a confrontation, but instead it felt like a reckoning. "I did it for a reason, Lisa," I said, trying to explain. "I had to stand up for myself, for the women he hurt." "I get that," she replied, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "But you didn't think about what this would do to our family. You didn't think about me, you just acted." I felt a surge of anger. "You think I wanted this? You think it was easy for me to expose him? I was betrayed, Lisa. I was the one who was hurt." "Maybe you should have confronted me first," she shot back, her voice rising. "Instead of going behind my back and ruining someone's life." The accusation stung. I had been so focused on my revenge that I hadn't considered the collateral damage, but I couldn't back down now. "I couldn't just sit around while you were off having an affair. I had to do something." We sat in silence, the tension crackling between us. I could see the pain in her eyes, and for the first time, I questioned whether I had made the right choice. Was my desire for revenge worth the destruction it had wrought on our marriage? The next few days were a blur. The media continued to cover Alex's downfall, but I found it increasingly difficult to celebrate. Lisa and I were like strangers in our own home, and every conversation felt like a battle. I tried to reach out to make amends, but the chasm between us only widened. Then came the bombshell. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through the latest updates on Alex when I received a notification from Sarah. She had sent me a link to an online article that sent a chill down my spine. The headline read, "Journalist Exposed, a deeper look into the allegations against Alex Harris." As I clicked through, my heart raced. It detailed not only the accusations against Alex but also hinted at the possibility of legal action from him. He was planning to fight back, and I knew that if he did, it could mean severe repercussions for me and the women who had come forward. I immediately called Sarah. "Did you see this?" I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. "Yes, and I'm worried," she replied. "If Alex decides to go after us legally, we need to be prepared. We can't let him silence us." Panic surged through me. I had acted impulsively, and now the walls were closing in. "What do we do?" I asked, my mind racing. "We need to gather more evidence, solidify our stories, and prepare ourselves for what's to come," she said. "But we have to be careful. Alex is powerful, and he won't go down without a fight." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The reality of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I had opened Pandora's box, and now I was facing the consequences. I felt trapped in a game I had initiated, one that was spiraling out of control. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. I had wanted revenge, but at what cost? My marriage was hanging by a thread, and the possibility of legal repercussions loomed over me like a dark cloud. I was no longer just a man wronged. I was a man on the brink of losing everything. I needed to make a choice. I could continue down this path of destruction, or I could seek a way to salvage what remained of my marriage and my integrity. But how could I face Lisa after everything that had happened? How could I undo the damage I had wrought? The answer eluded me, and I fell into a restless sleep, haunted by the choices I had made and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The following days were filled with a heavy sense of dread as I grappled with the consequences of my actions. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing between my desire for revenge and the remnants of my marriage hanging precariously beneath me. I knew I had to confront Lisa again, to try to find a way back to each other amidst the wreckage. One evening, after another long day of waiting for the other shoe to drop, I found Lisa in the living room staring blankly at the television. The news anchor was discussing Alex's response to the allegations, and I could tell from her expression that she was deeply affected. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes still glued to the screen. "About what?" "More about how you ruined someone's life." I felt the sting of her words, but I pressed on. "No, about us, about what's happening to our family. I don't want to fight anymore." Lisa turned to look at me, her expression softening slightly. "I don't know if we can go back to what we had, Mark. You've changed. I've changed." "I know," I said, my heart racing. "But I need you to understand why I did it. I felt betrayed, and I wanted to protect myself. I wanted to expose Alex for who he really is." "Did you ever stop to think about what that would do to me? To our kids?" she replied, her voice rising. "I've been through enough, and now you're dragging me into this mess." I could see the pain in her eyes, the hurt that I had inflicted. I had been so consumed by my quest for revenge that I hadn't considered the fallout. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't think it through. I was blinded by anger and hurt." Lisa looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mark. I don't know if we can survive this." My heart sank. The weight of her words felt like a shackle around my chest. I realized that I had let my desire for vengeance overshadow everything I had once held dear. I had to make a choice, not just for myself, but for our family. "What if we faced this together?" I suggested, my voice steadying. "What if we fought against Alex together? We can support each other through this." She hesitated, her brow furrowed with uncertainty. "And how do you propose we do that? You've already made your choice." "I can reach out to the women who spoke out. We can gather more evidence. We can hold him accountable together. I'll take responsibility for my actions, but I need your help to navigate this." Lisa sat in silence, her expression shifting as she processed my words. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the conflict between her anger and the remnants of our love. "And if this backfires, what if he destroys us?" "I won't let that happen. I'll do whatever it takes to protect us," I promised, my heart racing with determination. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa finally nodded. "Okay, but we need to be careful. I can't go through this alone." The relief that washed over me was palpable. We were still standing, still fighting, and for the first time in weeks I felt a glimmer of hope. We spent the next few days strategizing, reaching out to Sarah and the other women, and preparing for whatever Alex might throw our way. As we collaborated, I began to see a change in Lisa. The anger that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. We were united against a common enemy, and it felt like we were slowly rebuilding the bridge that had been burned. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. Alex's legal team reached out, demanding a retraction of the article. They threatened to sue for defamation, claiming that the allegations were unfounded and that my actions had caused irreparable damage to his reputation. I felt a rush of panic. This was the moment of truth. I gathered Lisa and Sarah, along with the other women, and we held a meeting to discuss our next steps. "We have to stand our ground," I said, my voice firm. "We can't let him intimidate us. We've come too far to back down now." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We need to prepare our case. We have the evidence to support our claims, and we can't let fear dictate our actions." With renewed determination, we began to compile our evidence, organizing everything into a coherent narrative that showcased Alex's pattern of behavior. The more we worked together, the more I felt the bond between Lisa and me strengthen. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were partners in a fight that had become bigger than either of us. Eventually, the day arrived when we would confront Alex and his legal team. We met in a conference room filled with tension and uncertainty. As I sat across from Alex, I could see the arrogance radiating from him, but I also noticed the flicker of fear behind his eyes. He knew that the walls were closing in. The meeting was intense, filled with back-and-forth accusations and legal jargon. But for the first time, I felt empowered. I had Lisa by my side, and we were fighting for our family, our truth. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out our case with conviction, detailing the evidence we had gathered and the stories of the women who had come forward. Alex's bravado began to crumble as the weight of our claims settled in. I could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about accountability and the consequences of his actions. After what felt like hours of negotiations, we reached a settlement. Alex agreed to step down from his position and issue a public apology, acknowledging the harm he had caused. It wasn't the complete victory I had envisioned, but it was enough. As we walked out of the conference room, I turned to Lisa, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," I said, my heart swelling with pride. She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We did it together, Mark." In that moment, I realized that my quest for revenge had transformed into something far more meaningful. I had fought for my dignity, but I had also fought for my marriage. We had faced the storm together, and it had brought us closer than ever. As we drove home, I felt a sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we were ready to face whatever challenges came our way. I had learned that love was not just about the good times. It was about standing together in the face of adversity, fighting for each other, and reclaiming what was rightfully ours. I glanced over at Lisa, her hand resting on mine, and I knew that we would emerge from this stronger than before. The past would always linger, but it no longer had the power to define us. We were moving forward, hand in hand, ready to embrace a future built on trust, resilience, and love. As we pulled into our driveway, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had fought for my family, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The story was finally over, but our journey was just beginning.